"Hey, you there with the mop, come up here and give us a little show." Tyler Rhodes's voice echoed across the mat, his black belt glinting beneath the fluorescent lights. He squinted, smirking. "I bet you've never seen a real fight in your life, have you?" Grant Miller paused mid-mop and slowly looked up. At 42, he had been the janitor at Rose City Dojo in Portland for just 3 weeks. Usually, he came after classes ended, when only the hum of the vacuum and the scent of floor cleaner kept him company. But that Thursday night, the advanced class was still in session. "I don't want to disturb you, Sensei Tyler," Grant said quietly, voice low and calm. He bent down again, scrubbing at a stubborn stain. "I just want to finish up so you can continue." Tyler burst out laughing, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look at that. He's so scared he won't even step on the mat." 8 students laughed awkwardly. A few exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to speak. What Tyler didn't know was that the man holding the mop had spent the last 20 years trying to forget who he really was. 20 years since the day he walked away from the ring after an accident that changed everything. A secret so deep that not even his 10-year-old daughter had ever heard it. "Come on now," Tyler taunted, swaggering closer with that same arrogant grin he used to intimidate newcomers. "Just a light demo. I bet you don't even know a basic guard stance. Let my students see the difference between a martial artist and a janitor." Something stirred inside Grant's chest, like a sleeping muscle waking up after a long rest. His eyes met Tyler's, and for a fleeting moment something passed between them, enough to make the younger instructor hesitate, stepping back ever so slightly, without understanding why. "It's just an educational demonstration," Tyler said, his voice now a touch less confident. "Nothing serious, just to show the newbies why we respect martial arts." Grant set the bucket down and straightened up. His movement was light yet precise, far too fluid for someone who'd never touched a mat. The air shifted. Conversations stopped. Only the sound of breath remained. "All right then," Grant said, voice calm as still water before a storm. "But when we're done, you'll apologize to all of them for turning a place of discipline into a circus." Tyler forced a laugh, but it came out uneasy. "Apologize? You'll be the one apologizing to the floor after your face hits it." No one in that room knew that Grant Miller was once Grant the Phantom Miller, 5-time MMA world champion. He'd walked away at the peak of his career, after the accident that claimed the life of his best friend and sparring partner. Since that day, he had sworn never to fight again. But some vows are made to be broken, when dignity is trampled. If you believe true strength lies in calmness and self-respect, hit subscribe now. Because this story will make you rethink what strength really means. And then, as Grant stepped onto the mat, the entire dojo held its breath. What happens when the man the world forgot decides to stay silent no longer? Tyler adjusted his black belt with a theatrical gesture, clearly savoring every second the spotlight shone on him. "Gather around, everyone. Tonight, you're about to witness a live demonstration of why martial arts has ranks and hierarchy." Grant quietly watched as 8 students formed a half-circle around the mat. Some looked eager, others uneasy. A brown-haired girl with her hair tied neatly whispered something to her training partner, who only shook his head as if to say, "Don't get involved." "Look closely, everyone," Tyler continued, his tone dripping with contempt. "This is the perfect example of why everyone should know their place. This dojo isn't for... well, you get the idea." A familiar ache rose in Grant's chest. Not because of Tyler's words, he had heard far worse, but because of the tone, that smug tone. That way, people use power to make others feel small. 22 years ago in Las Vegas, he had heard those same kinds of words. Who does this country bumpkin think he is? That night, the pressure from the ridicule had eaten away at him, and just a week later, the terrible accident with Jack Morrison had taken the life of his closest friend. "Sensei Tyler," the brown-haired girl spoke softly, breaking the tension. "Maybe we should continue with our regular class. It's getting late." "Megan O'Reilly," Tyler snapped, his voice sharp as a blade. "Are you questioning my teaching methods? Sit down and watch closely. You'll learn more in the next 5 minutes than in a month of practice." Grant noticed how deliberately he had said her full name, a petty display of authority. He also saw the fear in her eyes, the same fear he had seen in his own reflection 20 years ago, when he'd wake up in the middle of a nightmare. That accident still haunted him. A series of punches. Too fast. Too strong. Jack fell, his head hitting the mat with a dull thud that sounded like fate snapping in half. The investigation called it an accident, but Grant knew the truth. He had lost control. He had let the crowd's contempt fuel his fists and lost everything. "Well then, Mr. Janitor," Tyler sneered, "why don't you show my students how to hold a basic defensive stance? Or is that too complicated for someone whose specialty is holding a mop?" Laughter spread through the room, but Grant stood still. He closed his eyes, and in a single breath, he was no longer in Portland. He was back in Las Vegas, under the blinding lights, surrounded by mocking voices. Moments before the tragedy that changed his life forever. "What's wrong? Scared?" Tyler's voice cut through the silence as he began circling Grant like a predator sizing up its prey. "Or are you just planning to stand there like the floor lamp you push around all day?" Then he touched Grant, a light shove on the shoulder, harmless in appearance, but laced with arrogance from a man who'd never been taught the meaning of consequences. Grant absorbed the push, without moving an inch. His stance rooted deep, like oak roots gripping the earth, and in that instant, Tyler felt as if he had just tried to push a wall. The smirk on his face faltered. "Interesting," Grant murmured softly, almost to himself. "It's been a long time since someone dared provoke me like that." His voice wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but the entire atmosphere changed, replaced by the terrifying calm of a man who had already walked through life's darkest valleys. Tyler didn't understand. He still thought he was in control. "Did you hear that, guys?" he said, forcing a laugh. "He thinks this is interesting. Why don't we show him the difference between thinking you know and actually knowing?" But every insult, every laugh, only awakened something deeper inside Grant. The part of him he had buried for 20 years. Not rage, not vengeance, but a clear, grounded memory of who he once was, when he stopped running. Megan O'Reilly froze. She could feel it, the shift in the air. The way the man stood, breathed, and moved, all radiated control and a quiet power she had only seen in old footage of true masters. "Last chance, my friend," Tyler said, his voice now carrying a hint of impatience. "Either you accept this little demo like a man, or I'll call security to throw you out. And guess what? You'll lose your job, too." Grant opened his eyes, his gaze locked onto Tyler's. And in that moment, a chill ran down the instructor's spine, as if he had just called the wrong name of a storm. "All right," Grant said slowly, voice low but resonant. "When we're done, I want you to tell them why you turned a place of learning into a circus of humiliation." Tyler forced a shaky laugh. "Explain? You'll be doing the explaining when you're flat on the mat." No one in that room knew that, For 20 years, Grant hadn't just been running from his past. He had been learning to master his anger, forging it into a weapon of precision and silence. Every insult, every shove, only fed the storm waiting to be unleashed. And Tyler Rhodes was about to be the first, and perhaps the last, to feel its full force. Tyler adjusted his stance, clearly pleased with the heavy silence that filled the dojo. 8 students formed a perfect circle around the mat. Some looked eager to watch the demonstration, while others couldn't hide their discomfort. "Everyone!" Tyler announced theatrically, his voice booming. "Tonight, you'll witness a lesson worth more than 6 months of training. The difference between those who dedicate their lives to martial arts and those who merely mop the floors where real fighters walk." Grant stood motionless at the center of the mat, but something in his breathing had changed. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, he was no longer in Portland. In his mind, he was back at the National Training Hall in Las Vegas. 22 years ago, the night of the World Championship fight against Victor the Demolition Man Petrov. "Look at that country boy!" someone had shouted from the stands back then. "I bet he won't last 3 rounds against a real fighter." Grant had won by technical knockout in the second round, but that victory had cost him his best friend, Jack Morrison, in a sparring accident just a week later. Pressure, prejudice, and one moment of lost control ended everything. "Well then, Mr. Janitor," Tyler sneered, circling Grant like a predator. "Why don't you show my students how not to hold a defensive stance? Or is that too complicated for someone who only pushes a mop?" Laughter rippled through the room, but this time a voice rose above the mockery. "Sensei Tyler." Everyone turned. Megan O'Reilly, 22, a purple belt in jiu-jitsu and a graduate student in sports psychology, stood tall, eyes steady. "May I ask you something?" The dojo went dead silent. Tyler turned toward her, eyes narrowing, caught between surprise and irritation. "Sorry, Megan, but who's teaching this class? Me or you?" "You are, Sensei," she said calmly. "But teaching doesn't include humiliating someone and calling it instruction." Several students exchanged uneasy glances. No one had ever spoken to Tyler that way before. "Humiliating?" Tyler scoffed. "This has nothing to do with humiliation. It's about respect and knowing your place." Grant opened his eyes. Something about the way Megan stood reminded him of Emma, his younger sister. She had the same eyes, the same courage, always speaking out against injustice, even when it hurt. Emma had died a year ago, hit by a drunk driver on her way home from a hospital shift. She was only 24. Another loss, while he'd chosen to hide from the world. Megan, too, carried her own scars. She had lost her father in a similar accident, the man who taught her that true strength is never used to intimidate the weak. And today, watching Tyler abuse his authority, she couldn't stay silent. "Perhaps," Tyler said, lowering his voice into a dangerous tone, "if you don't respect my methods, you should find another place better suited to your philosophy." The air grew thick, but Megan stood firm. "My tuition's paid, Sensei, and I believe everyone here deserves to learn in an environment built on respect, not humiliation." Grant smiled faintly, not in defiance, but with the quiet relief of a man who had just remembered why he stopped hiding. For 20 years, Grant had lived with guilt, for 2 deaths that had haunted him, Jack's and Emma's. 20 years of running, of surrendering fame, of abandoning himself. But seeing Megan stand up for what was right, he remembered who he used to be. "Tyler," Grant said, his voice low but steady, The entire room turned toward him. The girl's right. This isn't martial arts. This is you trying to feel important, by making others feel small. Tyler's face reddened. He spun around. You dare lecture me about martial arts? You probably don't even know what a dojo is. Grant stepped forward once. His posture shifted. Shoulders opened, center of gravity lowered. His stance so balanced that any trained eye could see it immediately. A perfect guard. Actually, Grant said quietly, I know exactly what a dojo is. And I also know that this place stopped being one a long time ago. A shiver ran down Tyler's spine. Something in the man's breathing, in the way he stood, triggered a primal instinct, a warning to stop. But pride drowned out reason. Enough, Tyler growled, dropping into a fighting stance. Let me show you what respect means. Megan watched, torn between fear and awe. The way Grant moved, the restraint in every motion, the rhythm of his breathing. It was all too deliberate, too measured. She realized then, this was no ordinary janitor. Grant closed his eyes and drew a long breath. 22 years of muscle memory flooded back. Every strike, every victory, every lesson etched into his bones. When he opened his eyes again, Tyler Rhodes was no longer facing a janitor. He was standing before Grant, the Phantom Miller, 5-time MMA world champion. Last chance to apologize, Grant said calmly, his voice steady yet commanding. To her, to your students, and to yourself. Tyler laughed, but the sound trembled. Apologize? You'll be the one apologizing when you're flat on the floor. He didn't realize Grant had already read him like an open book. The high guard, the telegraphed shoulders, the unsteady back foot. 22 years away from the ring couldn't erase the instincts that once made him a world champion. Megan noticed several students subtly step back, as if sensing the storm about to break. The air grew heavy, electric, like lightning waiting to strike. Grant stood still, eyes calm, a faint smile crossing his lips. Not anger, not vengeance, but the quiet resolve of a man who had finally found a reason to break his 20-year silence. And as he took his first half-step forward, everyone in the room understood. Something extraordinary was about to happen. The Rose City Dojo fell into a suffocating silence. Every gaze fixed on the two men at the center of the mat, one wearing a black belt, rigid in a mirror-practiced stance of confidence, and one who had been holding a mop just minutes earlier, now standing upright, shoulders relaxed, eyes lit with an uncanny calm. Tyler adjusted his black belt, his movements slow, almost ritualistic. He needed this moment, needed that feeling of power to hide the unease creeping through him. Everyone, focus, Tyler declared, striving for solemn authority. What you're about to see isn't just a regular session. This is a lesson about hierarchy, about why people like us spend years earning this black belt. He patted the belt. The sound rang out in the silence. Grant watched Tyler with the eyes of a man who had seen too much. He recognized it immediately. This wasn't true confidence. It was a mask he himself had once worn, a similar mask 20 years ago, when he'd been breaking inside but had to appear invincible outside. Tyler, Grant said softly, his tone not threatening, are you sure you want to do this? It wasn't a challenge, it was a warning. One last time. But Tyler had gone too far to back down. People were watching. If he retreated now, he'd lose all credibility. I don't just want to, Tyler answered, his voice a notch higher, a tell of nerves. I need to do this.